as we closed up last year, I was talking about doing a whole year on Revelation, and this book that had all kinds of possibilities. And you know what? I got reading it, and I got bored, silly, and I said, I can't do this. So if you want to read the book, I've got a copy you can have. But it really that book was about. Bill, did you get it? Because I know you asked for all.
I thought about it. I looked up the author.
Yeah.
And when I saw his background, I didn't want to read it.
Okay. Well, his background's not too bad, but it's about all the crazy ways people interpret Revelation and where those roots are that those things come from. Who started it, why, and all that kind of stuff. And I said, we're going to get back to the Bible.
Why I didn't buy it?
What's that?
I don't believe that Jesus was the Son of God. And
I didn't see that anywhere. No, I didn't see that anywhere.
Yeah, wow.
He has books on all kinds of aspects of the Christian faith, but I never saw that anywhere. Anyway, I'm sorry, Brad.
Does he also explain the true meaning?
No, he never does. He comes down to what he thinks, but that's just what he thinks, I've already done a class on Revelation that's the true meaning of Revelation. You all knew that.
Have you read the book?
No. It's other people's material, but I believe it. Anyway, we're now going to deal this year with Genesis, Exodus, and Luke, Acts. And there's a reason for that. This is what I call the beginnings. The beginning of creation, beginning of a people, and then the beginning of the church, and the beginning of the dislodging of this faith from the Jewish faith and the creation of this the early comings of the church. And I mentioned in the introduction day, the last Sunday of August that we did a couple of weeks ago, that all the things like the prodigal son, the guy who, the Good Samaritan, that's the type, Good Samaritan, things of that sort, that are in Luke and nowhere else. And so we're going to look at Luke specifically. That's Luke, Acts, and the Gospel of Luke. So we're going to start out with a rousing, for most of you, probably kind of a brief refresher on Torah. Okay. Torah. And this is the reason we're doing this is this is totally the foundation of the Jewish faith and what becomes the Christian faith. This is the foothold. It's also called the Pentateuch, meaning 5 books or scrolls, including Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Traditionally known as and attributed to Moses. Moses did not write the Torah.
Part of it?
No. Moses is a prominent personality in the Torah. Moses brings the law, which is recorded in the Torah. And so it became known as the 5 books of Moses. And you know who gave it that title? And people thought then, well, Moses wrote the 5 books. No. Who gave it that title? Publishers. Looking for a way to have a gimmick to get their Bible in front of people instead of somebody else's Bible. And make money. That's the whole purpose of it.
Do you know who actually wrote books?
There are all kinds of authors involved in it. Are you shutting us up?
I am. Is that okay?
Well, as long as I guess there's a reason. I'm too loud. I know. Thank you.
You learn to project your voice.
Oh yes. Oh yes. So anyway, the Torah provides a foundation for Jewish thought and practice. It is the bedrock, the heartbeat of Judaism, the authority for all that follows. Some Jewish scholars, and I did not know this till I found it, would say that the remainder of the Old Testament and all other writings and all oral traditions are simply elaborations of the Torah. Aspects of all other Jewish writings reflect on the Torah and expound on some part of it. The basic theme of the Torah is God, the creator of the world, called the patriarchs and matriarchs to be a blessing to the nations and promised them the land of Canaan. That's it. Now, where do you find most of that? Genesis 12, 1-3. I will make you a blessing. I will make you a nation, and through you, all the nations of the world will be blessed. That is the heart of the Torah, Genesis 12. It is the covenant with Abraham. This author adds that the promise of the land of Canaan is part of that, but that's not in Genesis 12, 1-3. That comes later. Any questions?
When the Jewish synagogue, they bring out the scroll. Is that just the Torah?
No, they have scrolls of. They have three basic scrolls: the Torah, the prophets, and the writings.
They're separate.
Those are separate scrolls. Just because of the massive amount of material.
Yeah, we were told when I come out with the Torah.
Yeah.
And they had two of them, $25,000 each.
Oh, I don't doubt it.
Handwritten.
Yeah, they're
No
hand.
mistakes.
Yeah. And those, sometimes depending on, the place where they keep the scrolls is known as the, what is it?
I can't think of what.
Anyway, if it's large enough, then they might have 2 or 3 scrolls that contain the Torah because they're, but they're smaller scrolls and they just have 2 or 3 of them. Sometimes they have 1 scroll that's the entire Torah. It just depends on how benevolent the person who's buying the Torah is. How much money. Pardon me?
And the font size makes.
And the font size, yeah.
I'm assuming all the Torahs are in Hebrew.
Yes. The scrolls are.
Yeah.
And when a kid or a son makes his bar mitzvah, he's reading from those scrolls in Hebrew.
And they all say exactly the same thing.
Yeah, and they are without error. In other words, yes, those scrolls are. If there is an error made, they are discarded, totally trashed, and so they're promised to be without error.
No White House.
No White House. No.
Is it Ark of the Law?
The Ark of the Covenant. Yeah, the Ark. That's where that's what they call the place. Of course, the Ark of the Covenant was the container of the law through the desert and into until there was a temple. But today they call the place that houses the scrolls the Ark. Thank you. Hey, I'm getting old. It's gone sometimes. That's why I've always been a manuscript preacher. As if it's not in print, I'm not at all sure it's going to come out. Okay, so we're going to start in the beginning with creation and take a look at those 2 stories that swing wide the door of Torah. The first, Genesis 1, is sophisticated, it's thoughtful, it's majestic, it's a majestic account laced with theological insights. You can spend a year in that Genesis 1 and milk it for all that it's worth. It is incredibly rich theologically, and you think about the order of creation and how things are ordered, and it just makes sense. You know, you have to have water before you can have plants. You have to have plants before you can have animals. You have to have all of that before you got a person who is supposed to keep all that.
So the plants came first.
Now, water and the air and the separation of the firmament and the land, and then the land and the sea and all that, and then the plants. But anyway, it's just a very, very rich. The second story, which is Genesis 2, starting in verse 3, second story is earthy. It's primitive. It's playful. It's hinting of truths yet to be explored. It gives you glimpses of all kinds of different things and doesn't explore any of them. If you think of Genesis 2 and Adam and Eve, all of that, it's a totally different concept of creation. Each interacts with the other to give us a rich creation and caring faith. The beginning words could be translated when God began creating the heavens and the earth, which is incredible to start out this text, the whole entirety of the Bible. The first note is God. In the beginning, God. When God began creating, that's the nuance we don't get from the King James. You know, when he began creating the heavens and the earth, God was, God spoke, and God said, and it was done. The universe takes form, and the Bible begins when God speaks. It's a beautiful way to think of that. I think. You can spend all year looking at each day of creation, but I want to focus on the human and think about human beings that are made in God's image. The term image of God, imago Dei, which is the Latin and has taken on kind of a life all of itself. When people say imago Dei, they are talking about the creation of humanity in the image of God. Some say that to be in the image of God is to have the ability to decide, to think, to choose. That separates us from the birds and the animals, the rocks and the trees. Having had birds for 23 years, I might have issue with that statement. They can certainly choose what they want to do. Others suggest that the image of God means to be able to relate to love. We should keep our focus not on ourselves, but on others. That's what relational love is about. Others. Other people are made in the image of God and reflect the divine to us. Therefore, we should treat other people with respect because they represent the Holy One to us. My neighbor has intrinsic worth because he or she is the image of God. Guess what? I also have intrinsic worth as well as considerable responsibility because I too created in the image of God.
You know who painted that image?
Michelangelo, yeah. That's the Sistine Chapel. And it's this idea that others are containers of the image of God, to me, it kind of whelms inside of us that the fact that means that we are the image of God to others. We need to hold each other in respect. We need to respect ourselves, but we also need to respect others because they are reflecting God's image to us. We could spend all year of work talking about that one.
So when I
Okay.
see this guy filled with tattoos.
Yep.
Okay. Sure.
You may not like it. That doesn't mean that it isn't.
It's God's body. It's a holy temple. Where you just,
Well, no, you're saying that the body is the image of God. No, I'm saying the person is the image of God. Goes way beyond the body,
The heart and the soul.
the heart and the soul. All that person makes, all that makes that person be who he or she is. We work with this gal, many of you know, Brianna, who has 2 little kids, and she is disabled. She cannot drive. She's living on disability in a garage apartment that we created for her because she had nothing else. And Brianna, every time we go see her, has a different tattoo or has a different piercing. She's got piercings all over the place now. And her friends are tattoo artists and whoever does piercings. I don't know who that is. But anyway, and she's a wonderful person. She's an incredible mother. And she's doing what I can't believe others could imagine doing and living in this situation, having been abused her entire life. Last time she went to see her mother drew a gun on her. Does that grab you? And back in Odessa, and she hightailed it out back here real quick. So, but anyway, you know, tattoos and piercings are not the person. They are a reflection of something else going on. And so it's easy to get swayed by that, but don't let it fool you. Anyway, so the creation begins. The second story of creation is much older, and it's more down to earth and whimsical. God seems to start with a piece of dried up desert. And when God acts, life springs forth. Water begins to flow over the whole face of the ground. The root meaning of the Hebrew word for formed, sometimes translated molded, may be seen in a potter's wheel. The Lord took dirt from the ground. Notice the relationship between humankind and earth. Functioned as a potter that has molded this person and breathed into the clay figure the breath of life. Hebrew word ruach. Ruach is an incredibly powerful word throughout the Old Testament. It is the Spirit of God. And it is also breath. When they say breathe life into it, ruach, the Spirit of God is breathed into this person. In Greek, pneuma is the equivalent, but it doesn't have the power of ruach. I love ruach. Both words mean wind, air, breath, and spirit at the same time. And the man became a living being because of ruach, God breathing life into him. And literally that means this man became a bundle of needs and desires. Like all of us, right? Okay, so we got to get to the tree. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Yeah.
So did God create these needs and desires?
Well, yeah, they're part of creation. That's sure.
Why?
Well, I think we're going to get to it here.
Okay.
The tree of the knowledge of good and evil refers more to experience than to hidden knowledge. The Hebrew word for good and can mean nice, pleasant, beautiful, as well as morally right. The word for evil can mean bad, vicious, wicked, as well as wrong. So to eat from this tree of knowledge would mean to open oneself to knowing a whole range of experiences, some desirable and some distortions of life. What does this tree symbolize? Boundaries. I like to use the illustration. If you ever watched they don't do it so much anymore. They use all kinds of rigs to do it. But back a few decades ago, when I was doing carpentry work, and there was a particularly steep roof, the roofers would put a line around them and throw it over the peak, and somebody at the other end would be holding on or it'd be tied off. And as long as they were tied to that rope, they were totally free on that roof. If for some reason that rope became loose, goodbye. They were not totally free. It's only when they had the boundary of the rope that they knew freedom. And I think that's what we're talking about here. It's only when we have these limitations and learn to live within them that we have freedom to be what God created us to be. When we push against those boundaries, when we go outside of those boundaries, we're not free at all. We're captive to other senses or other beings. Always in life, boundaries limits to what we are and who we are exist. But the tree attracts our attention in yet another way. Right and wrong, good and evil stand also at the doorway of Scripture. We're just in the second chapter, folks. God's holiness looms large in this strange tree. Human tendency is to want more, to think, if only I could get, or if only I could have, then I'd be happy. All that's overshadowed. God's holy boundaries are symbolically perceived in this strange tree.
I've got a question. You
Yeah.
may not have the answer.
Probably
The vocabulary today, our vocabulary is approximately how many words?
I have no idea.
And in the Hebrew of ancient times, how many words did they have?
Very few. This is
Yeah.
very primitive writing.
And I just am overwhelmed with the explanations of what you said there. How one word can have 6 or 7 or 8 different
Oh, yeah.
meanings.
Oh yeah.
I guess we gave them the meanings.
Yeah. Yeah. Because
It's
it's
our interpretation
yeah.
of an ancient. Right.
Well, we know a lot of what the original intent was because we have the original text for a lot of stuff. And so we know what those words mean. Maybe not the original text for Genesis. We don't have that. But we do have original Hebrew texts that have a lot of words that we can certainly gain the direct meaning for.
How far back?
Because they came out of Greek. Greek was the next translation.
Yeah, but we have a lot of original Hebrew too.
How far does it go back?
I think the oldest in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest original text that we have it's one of the prophets, and I'm not sure which one. Maybe Jonah, something of that sort, to like the 7th century BC. That's the oldest original text. But then we have the like we were talking about the Torah being held in the way they are copied without error from generation to generation to generation. We have a lot of that, but we don't have originals, but we do have a lot of good copy. So I think we're in pretty good straits in terms of the interpretation. But it's not just that. We have the testimony of the universe. Creation is a witness to God. How can anyone ever deny the reality of God with the mountains, the trees, and particularly the skies giving witness? Psalm 19, 1 and 2 says, the heavens are telling, that is telling about the glory of God. And the firmament proclaims, that is, shouts about his handiwork. Day to day pours forth speech like a daily newspaper. Remember what those were like? And night to night declares knowledge like an encyclopedia. It all gathers together in the evening and piles up, and we have that. That's why Paul could say in the New Testament that every person ought to know that a creator God exists. He says, ever since the creation of the world, his eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things God has made. So they, that is human beings, are without excuse. That's Romans 1:20. That's known as natural theology. The understanding that God is here coming from the creation that God has put in front of us. The last time Jan and I drove from, when we were living in Albuquerque, we drove from Taos down to Albuquerque. I've said this before, and she's going to get on me because I've said it again. We were driving down the Rio Grande Gorge, and I don't know if you've been there, but I told her, I said, if I ever cease to be in awe of this, shoot me, because I'm already dead. I mean, it's just magnificent. And that's what Paul's saying. He said, because of what God has created, you can't plead ignorance that there is a God. Look around you. Natural theology. Okay. Both creation stories convey connectedness. Humankind stands not in isolation from the rest of the created order, but in mutual relationship with it. From the very dust of the earth, humans were made. The same chemicals are in human bodies that are in soil and rocks. I got to tell you, when we were in South Africa back in 2017, in Botswana, we did a regular safari for a day and saw a group of giraffes. We went through this group a couple times actually and came back. And they just amazed me. And the thing that amazed me was they have to lick the soil to get the minerals. And giraffes' elbows don't work like ours do. So they spread their legs as far apart as they can until they can reach the ground, and they lick the ground. And then they throw their neck way up, and it brings their feet off the ground, and they clap. And they're standing upright again. And to see them do that is absolutely amazing. But it makes this point. Animals need the soil. They need the minerals out of the soil. We are made from those same minerals. We get our minerals in different ways. We get them through our foods. We get them through, I guess that's the main one, through the foods. But we all need that. And we're all one with this earth, literally. We're dependent on it. So connectedness is a big thing. Without the water, air, plant, and animals, men and women have no home. We have nowhere to be. Just as plants and animals replenish each other in a mysterious rhythm, so humankind exists and survives in a structure of interdependency, which is built into creation. when we talk about climate change, talk about interdependency. That's what we're talking about. And the future populations of this earth are going to need to deal with a climate that's very different from ours today. And whether they can survive that or not is the question. This really is a theological issue. God created it to be interdependent. Okay. So now I want to talk about the character of God. Notice and this is coming out of these two chapters as well. The parent-like feeling you sense in the God of creation. God builds a garden. As a mother bird builds a nest, God is building a garden with a tree. With a tree, lots of trees, with edible fruit, lots of things, but just stay away from that one. Okay? Talk about the limits. Like a thoughtful artist, God fashions a being of clay. Nothing is left to chance. Water, food, air, beauty, all are provided by the God of grace. Even loneliness concerns God. So God created a helper or a companion for the man. Right away, the Bible teaches us to make way for a God of compassion and for human beings who are part of the created order, yet somehow standing above it and responsible for it, strangely able to relate to the Creator. That's a bunch coming out of those chapters. That is and if any of you were at the unveiling of all the classes this year, back a couple of weeks ago, what's his name? Who's doing it with Robert?
John.
John, yeah, John McClure. John was talking about dissecting these chapters, and very specifically and very, very detailedly and everything. I want you to get the character of God that this is displaying for us. I really don't care about the parallelisms and whatever. I'm just glad that John decided to join us this morning. He's going off to choir.
Yeah.
See you later, bud.
All right.
And this is what I think the meat of this is about for me, is what God did very particularly was to build us a home in which to live and to move and have our being and relate to God. And it shows us the character of this one who is taking care of us constantly and consistently. Now, sin will strike us down in Genesis 3, okay? And we will spend the rest of the Bible and the remainder of human history trying to recover from Genesis 3, okay? But in Genesis 1 and 2, it gives us the original intent of creation. From the opening moments, men and women had their responsibilities. God created a garden, put people in it, and then put a hoe in their hands. Work was not invented with sin. Unfruitful, unfulfilling work was, but with the garden came cultivation and caretaking obligations. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to, King James says, to dress, till, and keep. Not just till it, but to keep it. To have it flourish in our hands as God created it to be. Human beings have dominion over everything. Humans say so would exercise authority, not as co-creator, but as stewards. We are called upon to guard and protect all that God has created. Naming the animals and the birds provided an opportunity for human authority. The act of naming carries with it a certain power over what we name. Don't tell my kids. We do have power over creatures and creation, animals and air and water, and we will be held accountable for our trusteeship. For creation is not ours to own, but ours to care for and to use for the glory of God. Next week, God scatters the proud. I love that picture of the earth. And they get all the continents in there, which is interesting. Anyway, so what are your thoughts?
I like your perspective. I like what you said, things.
I think if you focus in on not just the act of creation, but the act of, but even the order and of Genesis 1 and the garden aspect of Genesis 2, you get this sense that, whether you, there's a priestly tradition, which is Genesis 1, and there's a JEDP, Deuteronomic position, which is Genesis 2. These are two different traditions that have come together, and they've been placed next to each other. One didn't replace the other. They're both there, and they're different, and they're coming from different traditions. And those two give us a richness in creation that we don't often appreciate, I don't think. We often fight over, what day was humanity created, or how long was the day, all this garbage. It has nothing to do with the fact that God brought this stuff together in a way that benefits us and nothing else. It's for our use and usefulness. Thoughts?
I always looked at creation stopped at Adam and Eve. God was done.
God began creating.
Right?
Genesis 1 says God created ex nihilo. It's out of nothing.
So creation
Was a completed act.
completed.
Yeah.
With Adam and Eve.
That's not what it says. What it says is God created out of nothing. We don't create out of nothing. When we're being creative, we're using everything we've got available, and we bring it together in unique ways to create things. But God didn't do that. God created out of nothing. But what Genesis 1 says is God began creating. Began creating. God is not done. God is a part of this human experience that we're going through right now. And I don't know where he is, but I'm looking for him. Got to find God in all that's going on. Yeah.
I was just thinking of what you're saying, and I realized God created me, and there's no other me around, or there ever has been.
Thank goodness.
You beat me to it.
That's right. That's right. You say, well, your mother and your father created you. Well, guess what? Who created the ability for mother and father to create? you're looking at first acts, and yes, God created us all to be ourselves and nobody else. And when is it when somebody really makes it in terms of music or whatever, and they say, I don't know about you, but I'm a sucker for The Voice and a sucker for AGT, America's Got Talent, and on AGT, whenever a singer comes up, what's his name on the end? Simon. Simon always says, "That's a unique voice. That's a voice I can hear on the radio. That's a voice that's different." And boy, if you've been watching, this little gal from Sri Lanka or wherever she's from, a blind gal who is singing and playing the piano. Absolutely, she's going to win. She is absolutely incredible. And when she first auditioned, Simon went up to her after the first song and said, nobody knew what he said, but he said later, he asked her if she had another song. He wanted to hear her again. It wasn't that was a bad one. He wanted to hear more. And he came back, sat down, and she did another number. And he gave her the golden buzzer. And she's phenomenal. Well, she's found her voice. It's totally different from anybody else. And when we try to be somebody else, it's failure every time. When we find ourselves, and there are a lot of people who never do find themselves. When we find ourselves, we're in the Bible, in the Gospels, Jesus says, "Be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect." Perfection, in that sense, is not morally perfect. It's not physically perfect. It's not doing the perfect thing. It is being what God created you to be. Like this chair is perfect right now because I'm sitting on it. That chair isn't, because it's not being used the way it was created to be used. This is perfect. If you're doing what God created you to be, you're perfect. Doesn't matter. It doesn't say you're doing it well. You're not doing it perfectly, but you are perfect. Anything else? Okay, we're gonna talk next week, particularly about the Tower of Babel, Genesis 11, and the scattering of the people. So you might want to read that chapter this week. And as we go, let me ask if there's anything that